what you're engaging in when you get on a debate with somebody like a creationist or a flat earther, it's science communication with an opponent. And so you're not trying to convince that person. You will never convince that person. What you are trying to do is you're trying to lay out the arguments for your side and attack the arguments for their side for your audience, right? And they have an audience too. And the advantage of doing it is that then sometimes their audience could become part of your audience, because sometimes people switch sides, right?
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'll be talking more about how to debate creationists. I have taken on this topic in the past in my original episode on how to debate creationists, and I've also interviewed well-known evolutionary scientist Dr. Niles Eldredge, who was one of the founders of the Punctuated Equilibrium theory of evolution, alongside Stephen Jay Gould. Today, however, I'll be interviewing someone who I saw debating Young Earth Creationist Kent Hovind online. He's got a YouTube channel. The debate was not what one comes to expect from these affairs, and was more like a courtroom interrogation than the usual grandstanding and Gish Galloping that one might expect from a creationist debate. And that's not surprising because my guest is a lawyer. So let's see if we can all learn something. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app, share the love, and come chat with me on my Facebook group, The Rational View. Mr. Anderson is a practicing Canadian lawyer who focuses on litigation. Having spent years in and out of the courtroom cross-examining witnesses and analyzing arguments, he has recently turned his talents on proponents of pseudoscience and dogmatic thinking on the internet. He is most well known for his attacks on creationists such as Kent Hovind, and has recently started a YouTube channel where he breaks down the techniques he uses to force evasive and pugnacious individuals to come to grips with facts and arguments that they would prefer to ignore. His style, for those of you who have never seen his videos, is very reminiscent of a cross-examination, so his debates look very different from what you're likely used to seeing online. And he joins us here today. Mr. Anderson, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you very much for having me. Nice to speak with you.
So you are a Canadian lawyer, and you also have a YouTube channel that kind of lays out your strategy for cornering slippery debate opponents. Could you give us the link to your channel so anyone wants to go check it out, they can go take a look? Do you have a...
Sure, it's just at Mr. Anderson Crosses.
Excellent.
On YouTube.
At Mr. Anderson. Thank you. So Mr. Anderson is not your full name or is a pseudonym. Why do you feel the need to use a pseudonym in your online persona?
Well, as I tell people on my channel, I'm basically mean to people on the internet. And when you are, going into places like that, you're going into spaces where people, welcome you in, but then they're sometimes less welcoming when you do well. So it's not such a big problem when I fall on my face. It's a much bigger problem when I'm successful in sort of cornering somebody's favorite, favorite talking head. And I haven't had a problem yet, and I hope I never do. But it's a precaution, let's say, to sort of make sure that my career and family aren't negatively affected by doing something that I think is important, but that ultimately is not, my bread and butter.
Sure. I understand. So as a person in the legal profession, what got you interested in challenging pseudoscience and creationism especially?
It's kind of funny. So I was just watching some YouTube online, and I fell down a particular rabbit hole, and I started watching some debates with a fellow named Kent Hovind, and I kind of thought, like, this is kind of, and just sort of like debating him in my head as the other person was debating, and going, well, that's not correct, that's not correct. And I watched so darn many of them that I went, like, I feel like I want to share this. I want to tell people, like, there's a better way to do this. There are ways to make sure that these points that people are making are pressed home, and the other person has to deal with them. Because a lot of times, like, and I mean, I'm not a scientist. I don't know all of the science nearly as well as a bunch of the people that were debating him. But I know how to make sure that argument lands, and that it means something, that it, that it's clear what is going on to the audience. And so, like, that's my specific skill set, is to press those points home. And so I kind of went, like, if I just email or text these people and say, like, hey, I can tell you how to do this better, like, they're not going to listen to me. And I can tell you that for sure, because I tried that. People are like, yeah, sure, right? I was like, okay, well, I think I need to put my money where my mouth is. So I contacted, the person who handles Ken Hovind's debates, and I said, hey, I'd like to debate him.
Wow.
And took a while to get back to me, but he said, yeah, sure, let's set something up. And I figured he probably thought it was going to be another easy walkover, but it turned out not to be that for him, because I'm probably a little bit of a different customer than the people that he usually encounters. And again, I mean, I should say, like, I have nothing against Kent Hovind as a person, and I'm not attacking him. Like, I mean, it was good debating him, because he is slippery, and he's good at what he does, right? Like, his science is not the best, shall we say, but
sure.
In terms of rhetoric, like, he knows his rhetoric, so
he knows his crowd as well, and he's playing to a crowd, and I think most scientists that know the science come in to debate him expecting a scientific debate, and what they're getting is just a popularity contest more than anything. It would charisma and gift of the gab. And
I have a video actually on that very subject. There's a woman named Angela Collier, who is she's also a PhD, but in theoretical physics, I think it is. And she has a YouTube channel much bigger than mine. And she says, like, I don't think scientists should debate people like that. And I said, like, there's a difference between scientific debate and what she calls spectacle debate, which is basically what I'm doing, right?
Yes.
And the goal in a scientific debate is to get to the right answer, right? And you're trying to convince the other person that what you're saying is factually correct.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're debating somebody like Kent Hovind, like, that's not going to work. That will never happen. He will never admit that. He will never, even if you say the things, if you say it perfectly and you get everything correct, he will not admit that is, he won't admit that stuff's true, because that's not what's going on. That's not the goal. Like, what you're engaging in when you get on a debate with somebody like a creationist or a flat earther, or, a religious zealot or anybody like that, is you're engaging in, like, science communication, actually, right? It's science communication with an opponent. And so you're not trying to convince that person. You will never convince that person.
Right.
What you are trying to do is you are trying to lay out the arguments for your side and attack the arguments for their side for your audience, right?
Yes.
And they have an audience too. And the advantage of doing it is that then sometimes your audience, their audience, could become part of your audience, because sometimes people switch sides, right?
Sometimes you can make
there's a risk too. Yeah, there's a risk too, and the reality is that sometimes you have to be careful, because sometimes the debate is worth having, and it's valuable and it increases science communication, which is the goal, right? We want people to understand science. We want people to trust science. And a big part of building trust in science is testing your ideas in the crucible of opposition and showing that they're stronger and better and more robust and that they can beat these other ideas, right? So like there is good to be had in showing how strong and robust these scientific ideas are. But, and there's a big but, not all ideas, not all opposition ideas are created equal, and not all opposition ideas are worthy of sharing a platform with science. And so there is a risk associated with debating somebody on a fringe idea or like a, you know, an idea that A, doesn't have, you know, a very big following, and that by debating that, you know, person, you're elevating them to your level. And there's like this like equivalence, you know, like, oh, well, you know, looks like climate denial is as valid as climate, you know, as climate change. It's like, I mean, no, it's not. They don't belong on the same stage, right? Because one is actually robust and has support, and one of them is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? So like sometimes debate is valuable and does increase, you know, like people like watching debates. They like the spiciness. They tune in for the fight, you know, and they they end up with a bunch of learning, you know, as a side effect, right? It's like it's edutainment, right?
Yeah.
But you got to be careful.
I saw your debates with Kent Hovind online, and kudos to you. You did a great job. It was very educational, edutainment. Now, Kent, for those of people who don't know, is an evangelical Young Earth Creationist speaker, and he's the founder of Florida's Dinosaur Adventureland, and he apparently likes to be called Dr. Dino. And, you know, he's not really got a PhD from an accredited institution, as you pointed out.
Yeah, he's a doctor in the same way that, you know, Dr. Seuss is a doctor, yes. Right?
And he's actually been criticized by other Young Earth creationists for continuing to trot out debunked arguments. So in that way, you know, I lose a little bit of respect for him, because he has a belief that he feels must be true, and he kind of has, you know, what scientists or people who value logic would think of as underhanded methods. You know, the debates themselves were fabulous. I think your performance and your approach was probably something he'd never encountered before.
That's probably true.
How long did you prepare for that? Like, how much work did you put into that debate?
I mean, look, doing something like that, like properly preparing a cross, does take time and skill, right? So it isn't something that you can just walk in and do. Like, I mean, I did spend time to prepare for that, and it's something that, you know, like, it's kind of funny, right? Because there is one of the things that I'm trying to convey with my videos are, you know, some of the different techniques that you can use, but also, you know, some of the different techniques that you can use to prepare for the open discussion portion of the debates, right? Okay. Because people, you know, they're like, well, I'm going to prepare for a debate. I'm going to prepare my opening, because that's the part that I know I can predict, right? And like, that's, I mean, a lot of people, myself included, we skip the opening. We want the back and forth, right? And ad-libbing all of it is not the greatest idea.
Agreed.
You know, you need to have some preparation. You need to kind of anticipate some of the things that are going on. You can't script everything. Sometimes even, you know, Kent Hovind himself actually is guilty often of just giving canned responses to everything. And that's not a good idea either. Because everything, A, sounds very samey, B, doesn't really sound responsive to the argument, and you know, and C, like, it's kind of annoying, right? So like, you can't try and script out the open dialogue, but what you can do is you can prepare for it. You can anticipate what's coming. I should probably do more. I should do more detail on that, actually. It's not a good idea for a video.
There we go.
Yeah, on how to prepare.
So
for that part.
The debate topic was asking the question, can any living thing bring forth other than according to its kind? So this is the debate topic. Who chose that? Was that given to you by the organizers? Or is that
No, I chose it.
You chose that?
I chose it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I chose it on purpose too, because, it wasn't a topic which was unfamiliar to him or what, so it's not like I was catching him by surprise. He had, kind of a set piece, script of how he wanted that sort of thing to go.
Mm-hmm.
So Young Earth Creationism, for everybody who isn't aware of it, it's still around, is the idea that God created the world in more or less its present form about 6,000 years ago, and that Noah's flood is a real historical event that actually happened, which is responsible for all of the geologic column from like at least the Cambrian to like the death of the KT boundary, the death of all the dinosaurs, and some young earthers even throw the ice ages in there too. So that's between 4 billion or at least 550 million years worth of like erosion and deposition, radioactive decay of isotopes, all of the fossils, all of everything supposedly happened in that 1 year. And all of the animals that are in the world, those all descend from the two of every, quote, kind that Noah brought with him on the ark, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea further is that no animal can change kinds. So dogs produce dogs every time, and there were two dogs that were put on the ark. They were the created dog kind, and, wolves and coyotes and jackals and foxes and, so on. It's really kind of unclear whether, things like hyenas fall within that class, but we'll leave that aside. Are all descended from the original dog kind, right?
Yes.
And so I was saying to him, look, he said nothing can change kinds, and I said, well, biology is pretty messy. So, it's more like a color gradient, right? So, if you take the colors from like red to orange, wherever you want to draw that line, I can probably find you a color that crosses it, right? And that's kind of true for biology too. So we spent the first, 60% probably of the debate just trying to make him draw a line, which he was very reluctant to do.
Yes.
And then I crossed it.
Yeah, no, it was masterfully done. And I think, I've had some previous videos on how to debate creationists as well. And the mistake that most scientists make is that they get on the defensive. So most of these young earth creationists don't actually have a coherent theory. And realizing that, it's very easy to attack them on their own ground. But most scientists fall prey to the Gish Gallop, which is where Dwayne Gish popularized this, basically throwing a whole bunch of uncertainties in the scientific theory. And the scientist spends the rest of his time trying to argue esoteric minutiae on these various holes that the creationists aren't really scientists. They're theistic anti-evolutionists. There is no scientific
the problem that you're running into here is that you don't understand that there are a lot of problems with science, and that there are problems with genetics. And are you aware of the PCBX9 gene in humans? That blah 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 blah, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the Gish Gallop, right? Yeah. And they'll start saying things, and it doesn't matter that they're right or wrong, right? And people just they're like, no, that's wrong. You just said 8 interesting and wrong things, and I need to address them.
Yes.
Right? And it's like, no, you don't.
No, that's
you don't.
the trap.
Yeah. What you need, just this is sort of, preview of what you'll get in my channel. Like, in that particular situation, like if somebody does that and they go off and they say 8 interestingly wrong things, you don't address all of them. You don't need to. You shouldn't. You should say all of those things were wrong, and I'm not getting into it, because we're focusing on this. So back to this, and then you go back to the one thing you want to talk about. Because even though those things are super interesting, and I know you can rebut them, you won't. Because once you get close to rebutting one of them, they'll do the same thing again. And then you'll be chasing your tail forever. So you
You'll be on the
picked in
defensive.
advance before you ever sat down in front of a microphone that this was the, this one thing was the thing you were going to pin them down on, right? You picked that in advance and you're prepared for it. So follow your plan, right?
Mhm.
Stay on target. Do that thing, right?
Yeah, if you are well versed in all the topics, another good response is just those are all wrong, as you say. Pick your best one. Which one do you think is your strongest evidence? And we'll talk about that. Just keep it on one topic, keep it focused, and make sure that you can show that you understand what you're talking about.
Better yet is that you pick it.
Yeah.
Right. And that you don't let your, don't pick their strongest one. Pick your strongest one.
Mm-hmm.
Pick the one you know the most about, that that there's a clear problem with. Yes. And just do that one, right? They say 8 interestingly wrong things. Pick the one you like, right? And just go after it.
Yeah.
And by the way, probably in that situation, if you start saying 8 interestingly wrong things, you've already picked your thing and you were just talking about it, right? Mm-hmm. So just go back to it.
Mm-hmm. I liked how you pointed out that, Kent styles himself as these young earth creationists style themselves as biblical literalists, as though there is one literal reading of the Bible, and no room for allegory, except where they decide it's allegory. And you pointed out correctly that this is your interpretation of the Bible, and any biblical apologetics needs to be an interpretation. And this is how cults and wars get started, is that everyone has their own interpretation.
Yeah, well, exactly. And look, we're not attacking Christians here. There's plenty of science affirming Christians out there. And I don't have a problem with any of them. Like a family that's Christian, right?
Sure.
I'm not saying there isn't a God. I'm not saying that the Bible is wrong. I've said this to Kent I don't know how many times, and every time he says, "Well, so you're telling me the Bible is wrong? You're calling God a liar?" I say, "Sir, I'm not saying the Bible is wrong. I'm saying you're wrong."
That was a good line.
Yeah, but he keeps doing it. It is, as long as he keeps saying it, I'm just going to keep saying the same thing.
It's very easy because a lot of the opponents are atheistic or non-theistic, and so he's got his theistic flock following him, and this is a hot button, right? These are elite atheistic AntiGod Scientists types that are coming in and stomping on the holy book. It's like, no, you have to. No,
we're not stomping. Yeah, we're not stomping on the whole book. Is it possible? Do we know for sure that there is no God? Of course not. Nobody's suggesting that, and nobody's saying that evolution proves there is no God. All it proves is that that Earth wasn't created in 7 literal days, and that Noah didn't take 2 of every animal on the ark, and the whole world isn't populated by those 2 animals. There are facts that just make that view incompatible, right? Mm-hmm. But there are many other interpretations of the Bible which are perfectly compatible with all the evidence, and we have no problem. I personally have no problem with any of those interpretations,
as do most of the major churches of the world. Many of them have basically said, yes, we don't believe this. The Bible is a science textbook. It's a manual for spirituality. It's not ABCs of how to make animals.
Yeah, well, look, the Bible, there's lots of things in the Bible that I think any reasonable person, even Kent Hovind, will agree are allegorically true, right? Technically speaking, the mustard seed is not the smallest seed, right? Jesus says the mustard seed, the smallest of seeds, grows into a big tree. And even in Jesus's time, even within the knowledge of all those, of those particular groups, they knew that the orchid seed was way, way, way smaller than the mustard seed, right? It's just not. It wasn't the smallest seed then. It's not the smallest seed now. Does that matter to the story, to the lesson that he was trying to teach? No, it's not about that particular fact. And it's really just a question of okay, well, so how much of the Bible is like that? There's another part in the Old Testament where they said that the circle is the radius of the circle is 3 times its circumference. And,
Yes.
It's, well, technically, of course, no, it's not. It's pi, right? It's 3.14 something, so 159 something.
They can always bend over backwards and justify it.
Yeah. And it's like, but again, like, it doesn't matter to the story, like, and it doesn't matter to the lesson and the reason that stuff was being written. And, like, I think that the same thing is true for Noah's flood. Like, did Noah literally take 2 of every animal on the ark? Probably not, based on the evidence. But does that matter in terms of, like, the lesson and the story that's trying to be told? I don't think so. It's still true in its own way, just not literally true in the way that, Kent Hovind, for example, wants to say that it is.
I liked how you focused on defining kinds in your debate with Kent, because it is an ill-defined term, and the creationists use that in debates to not to ever get put down or nailed down to it. And he was squirming everywhere to not nail down what a kind was. How can you have a debate without defining your terms? And that's, very key, right? This is the,
and, he was annoyed with me, right? And he's like, why are you spending so much time on this? And I'm like, because otherwise, when I hit you with, when you're cornered later, you're just going to swarm away by saying, well, that's not what I meant. So we're going to talk about that first, right? And I'm going to make you, like, the nail, like, I started from the beginning, like, you agree that you are real, and that I am real, and that God loves us and doesn't lie to us. And I had to start with, like, his, what they call their presuppositions, right? Because otherwise, when we get to, anything, right? When we get to kinds, he'll say, well, it could have been different in the past, right? Well, no, it couldn't have been different in the past, because we talked about how God loves us and doesn't lie to us, and therefore we can trust our senses, and we can rely on the idea that nature is regular unless there's a miracle. And if there's a miracle, because God doesn't lie to us, then there should be evidence for that miracle. And do you have any evidence then that a miracle occurred here such that we shouldn't be looking at naturalistic explanations? If not, we talked about how naturalistic explanations then should be preferred in this situation. You can have those miracles, but you can't have invisible miracles that you can pull out of a hat with no justification. They're not in the Bible. They're not anywhere. Then no, you can't have ad hoc miracles, right? And so we go through that first.
Yeah, no, it's very good. And if you do support a young Earth creationist mindset, there's so many disconnections with science that it's just, you have to have deception or miracles, right? These have to be either, look at astronomy. You've got things that are more than 6,000 light years away that are doing things like orbiting and emitting light, and you can measure them, the orbits of these planets. You can measure the stars going supernova 180,000 light years away. Is this light was created in transit by God to deceive us? These sort of questions always
that's
come
the
up.
OG classic. That's the OG classic defeater to the idea of young Earth creationism. Is the light has light travels a certain distance at a certain speed, and so if that star looks 10,000 light years away, and I'm seeing its light now, then that light started its journey more than 6,000 light years ago, or 6,000 years ago, or it was created in transit. And there are a whole host of other theological problems associated with the appearance of age, and that's sort of the tricky God phenomenon. And it kind of goes back to that whole idea that God's nature is truthful. And, the idea that God would not create dinosaur bones in the fossils to trick, and confound the non-believers. Right.
Right. I mean, God gave us minds to figure this out, and science is a tool that we've created with our minds to learn about, God's creation. And, you can go back to the Bible, and it says that the rocks will cry out, right?
That's it. Yeah.
And they cry out
every
evolution.
aspect of my own creation cries out that the earth is more than 6,000 years old. And you're taking some hearsay, secondhand information, that was written in a book as being truer than, like, my own direct evidence of creation, right?
It was interesting in your debate with Kent. He kept going back at you saying, when are you going to bring forward your evidence for evolution? Like, he wanted you to bring forward something that he could poke holes in. And the topic wasn't evolution. He's just used to this, the scientist, trying to convince him of evolution, and him sitting back and just poking holes and bringing up bullshit ideas. So it was fun to watch that aspect of it just fall flat. He said, no, we're talking about kinds here. We're talking about your theory.
Well, have you seen part 2 yet?
Yes. It was very good.
Yeah. Part two is good because we get into more specific examples. And my favorite one is because Kent always says, well, dogs produce dogs every time, right? No exceptions. But it turns out that there is a very weird exception where a dog's was ovarian cancer did something very unusual in that it hopped and turned into and started living as a venereal disease, a single-celled organism in other dogs. It started living as a parasite. And like the cells are dog. They are 99.99% identical to every other cell in the original dog's body, like only as different as lung cancer is to other kinds of, to your regular lung cells in humans. Very similar, but living a completely different life.
Yeah, you cornered him and said, so are you saying that venereal disease is the same kind as a dog? That was, yeah. And he was like,
did not answer.
I'll have to think about that. It's like, yes, you will.
you do that. I have yet to hear back from him. Interestingly, I have heard him say dogs produce dogs every time, but I haven't heard him get back to me on whether or not he can tell the difference between a dog and a single-celled parasitic venereal disease.
I mean, it was a beautiful reductio ad absurdum of his argument. I quite enjoyed that. So you have this website that gives people, or the YouTube channel that gives people advice on how to talk. So what are some of the other ideas that you think people need to know before they enter the gladiatorial arena of debating creationists and pseudoscientists?
Well, so like you don't have to do all of the things that I do, right? Like my style is my style, and it comes from sort of my background, right? And I mean, if you're going to step into the ring, then play to your strengths. So like, I mean, you're a scientist. If I were in your shoes, I'd probably focus on the distant starlight problem, for example, and so like my strength would be when he starts talking about, well, God stretched out the heavens, and so that means you can go, well, no, that's theoretically not possible because, and I'm sure there's like a whole bunch of good reasons and math behind like how we know and why we know that these things are real and that they're that far away and that they've been that far away for at least however long. But there are still so play to your strengths, I guess, is the first thing. Don't worry about necessarily fitting into a box or trying to be somebody that you're not. But there are still like certain techniques that you can use. So like, I talk about when somebody says something that is wrong, and you're like, okay, here's the moment, and how you need to slow down and make sure that you're cutting off all of the little pathways that that they're going to try and slip away to say, oh, that's not what I meant. Right? You got to like address those first. This isn't what you mean, right? Oh, of course not. That's not what I mean. This isn't what you mean, right? No, of course not. That's not what I mean. And they'll give you those at first, right? Because they figure, well, I've got my main argument and that's what I mean. And then you can present, okay, but so this is what you mean, right? Yes, that's what I mean. Right. Now here's a problem with that. And now, oh no, right? Like now all of my escape hatches are nailed shut, right? And I can't get away. Now I have to deal with it, right? So like little things like that, or I mean, sometimes they're even more fundamental, like, how to stay calm and not let the person like throw you off by just insulting you, right? That's an easy one they'll do, right? And they'll just start saying things that are offensive, right? when they're starting to feel cornered, right? And then you'll be like, you can't talk to me that way. And well, yes, I can. And it's like, haha, right? Like I escaped from my corner because I was able to change the subject to angering you, right? And like, if you watch me, I'll just kind of be like, they'll be like, well, you don't know anything. And I'll be like, well, that may be, sir, but really that's not what I'm talking about, right? I could be as ignorant as a doorknob, but the fact of the matter is that, I need you to answer this question, right? And just, redirect them right back onto the thing and just kind of be implacable, right? It's like, you're like the Terminator, right? Just like, doesn't feel fear or pity, it will not stop until you answer. Right? That's sort of the way it works.
Does that come from your legal training? Do they give you training for cross-examining and that sort of thing to be able to understand these ploys?
It comes from your practice, right? So it's actually a skill they don't teach you a lot of in law school, or at least not in the law school that I went to. And I went to a good law school, but I mean, in law school, they teach you the theory, they teach you the law. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of the practice, that's something that, you just kind of have to get a good mentor and get some miles on. And there are courses out there, Posner and Dodd is another, is like the standard if people want to pay money to learn those sorts of things. And they talk about like the chapter method of cross-examination, all those sorts of things. So there are resources out there, but they're geared very much towards lawyers. And so like, the goal of my channel is to kind of try and take a lot of that experience and those sort of, techniques and sort of retool them and repurpose them so that a regular person can use them in a regular debate. And sometimes, like techniques from the legal world sometimes don't necessarily work in the context of a debate because the person doesn't have to answer you. And you can't be like,
you're under oath.
direct the witness to answer because like they're not the witness, right? You have to to massage the techniques a little bit. They still work. They just need to be changed.
You also took quite a bit of time to try to nail down and close all those exits before you presented your arguments in the debate. What advice would you give for someone on a limited time? Say, let's say you've only got a half hour to debate rather than, half hour to set up your debate like you did.
Pick something simpler. Mm-hmm. Pick something a lot simpler. Pick a very, very focused point and understand that, you might be able to explain your whatever it is that you're trying to say in half an hour easy. Mm-hmm. That's not the metric, right? You need to be able, like, in order to get somebody to admit something and close off all the doors and do all those sorts of things in half an hour, it better be like a 5-minute argument. Because you're going to need that much time to just, go back and forth and like, nail it down and hold them down. Because you have to do, if you want it to like, if you want to get it out of them and you want to make sure that, that they're twisting in the wind and that it lands, then you're going to need to allow time for that. Yeah. You're going to need to allow time for them to fight you on it. Because it will be a fight.
In debates that I've participated in, that's basically been the problem, is that, you don't have time. You make your point, they make their point, and there's no real resolution, right? It's like, okay, we'll agree to disagree. Right? That's about as good as you can get. You do your best presenting your argument, and they present whatever bullshit they have. Excuse my French.
So I mean, like, let me give you an example. It's like for you, right? If you had half an hour, maybe like let's say you wanted to do distant starlight, right? Mm-hmm. You'd need to pick like a very specific aspect of distant starlight. So like maybe say, look, there's this thing called parallax, right? Which I mean, I'm just gonna explain it to an expert who knows better than me because we have an audience and it's just faster that way. Okay. So like parallax is if you hold your thumb up, close one eye and you cover my face and then you switch eyes, I escape, right? Because of the, right?
Yes.
And so if you're really good at math, like Dr. Scott is, then you can do a bunch of trigonometry by knowing how far apart your eyes are to figure out how far away your thumb is. And if you use the orbit of the Earth and a really, not too distant star, you can actually measure the distance to that star by knowing the orbit of the Earth, or the diameter of the orbit of the Earth. Mm-hmm. I would maybe pick that and then just show a specific example of one star that is more than 6,000 light years away that we know for a fact must be there because of parallax. And I wouldn't get into redshift, and I wouldn't get into standard candles, and I wouldn't get into cosmic expansion, and I would be like, none of that. Like, we can't go near any of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to spend most of your time redirecting and being like, so look, it's very simple. Parallax works, right? And this star, we can parallax it. It's not too far away, but it's more than 6,000. It has to be. Like the math says, we can measure this. That's it, right? And it's like, it's a very simple point. Takes you 2 seconds to say. That will take you half an hour to get them to, and then you still won't get them to admit it, right? But what you will be able to do is to allow people in their audience to see how difficult of a time they have in dealing with it,
mm-hmm.
and watching them twist in the wind. It's interesting that, like, I seen, I'm not sure whether I saw studies, but I certainly heard anecdotes, which is not the same thing. Of people saying, like, what convinced me of that to change my mind was not necessarily the arguments of the person that was trying to argue for the thing, was the fact the person who was arguing against it had ineffectual arguments, and I just kind of went, that doesn't, you can't support that, so I need to reconsider it, and then that allows them to look at the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, there is a very good one that I had seen on the speed of light and time. It's regarding Supernova 1987A, or Supernova Shelton, which was in the Magellanic Cloud. That's the one that I'm talking about. It's like 186,000 light years away, and there was actually a shell of dust around the progenitor of the supernova, and so we saw the light from the supernova, and then a few years later we saw the reflection of that light off the dust, and you can measure the size of that ring angularly on the sky and say, oh yes, that makes sense with the speed of light that we know now, the time it took to get there and then come to us. There's a geometric argument there that the speed of light hasn't changed over that 186,000 years, which is the typical defense that the creationists put up. Well, the speed of light has changed, and you can't believe that the speed of light was the same. That, well, you can measure it by looking at that reflection on the nebula around that, and it's the right size.
But how do you know how big the nebula is, other than by using the speed of light?
Yeah, and that is the counter argument that they'll put up there. And I don't remember
I'm not asking
the
from
exact
them. I'm
details.
asking from me.
Basically, you can measure the angle on the sky, and that angle at that distance divided by the speed of light is the right size. So the time it took to go from the center to the edge at 186,000 light years was the speed of light divided by that distance.
But how do we know what that distance is?
We can measure it on the sky, the angle.
Well, we can measure the angular distance, but I mean, that's going to depend on like how far away it is, right? Because as my fingers get closer to my camera, of course,
but if it's closer than the
changes, right?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the argument. This was many, many years ago that I saw it. But if I were to engage in that, that's something I would refresh in my mind.
Yeah, and that's kind of the other thing is like, even though you're obviously like, I mean, if you have a PhD in astronomy, like, props, right? You know your stuff. There's no question. But if you're going to go in, and debate a creationist, like, make sure that you've thought it out and you've thought about, the simple and obvious objections, because they're not going to, like me, I'm not an astronomer, I don't know, I like astronomy, I know a little, but I if we were to get into the math, like, I'm not gonna hang with you. No chance, right? Yeah, just make sure you know those things before you go in. Right?
Know it inside and out.
You're picking the topic, right? Yeah, know that stuff, right?
Yeah. So what's next on your agenda? Are you looking to debate other creationists? Do you have anyone on your target, in your sights?
Donnie Binski, who's he's a young Earth creationist who's associated with Kent Hovind, but he and I have a reasonable relationship. We, like, vehemently disagree on, pretty much everything to do with the science and stuff, but we're cordial. And at some point, he's kind of challenged me to try and explain to him how it is that the Y chromosome in chimpanzees is structurally so different from humans, and how evolution can explain that. He thinks that's a defeater to the link between humans and apes. So that's on the horizon. I've also been doing a bunch of stuff to do with, because these techniques, they work in a variety of circumstances. So obviously they work with respect to pseudoscience. They also work with respect to pseudo philosophy, right? And they work with respect to social issues as well. So when people talk about I've been looking at I've been looking at some issues associated with the LGBT movement, in anti-trans kind of positions where people are trying to distort science to deny the humanity of other people who are different than them. So that's something that I've been looking at. And I've been also doing some work with respect to they're called presuppositionalists, and it's like pseudo philosophy. Basically, it's that whole idea that you can't know anything unless you believe in God, and it's a bunch of that stuff that I nailed down at the beginning with Hovind. So we're looking at some of that stuff as well. But I don't know. I'm hoping that a new and challenging creationist or creation scientist shall emerge, and I can sink my teeth into them. So keep your eye out. We'll see.
I mean, my impression is that creationism has declined in popularity over decades. It's kind of like the same old guard. Ken Ham, Ken Hovind, the Kens. There was the irreducible complexity argument, or
and Michael Behe, irreducible.
Yeah, all the stuff about design versus, basically argument from incredulity that I can't imagine a way this could have evolved. Therefore, which I think that whole thing boils down to, where you only need one counter example to basically put a nail in it. You don't have to prove it. You just have to say, "Hey, if you can't imagine, here's a possible story."
They won't accept it. Nothing counts ever, right? So no matter what you show them, it won't count. That's kind of one of the reasons why Hovind and I spent so much time going around, and I had to get him to admit that. Then the example that I used in the first debate was cancer, right? The idea that if a part of my body decides it doesn't want to be a multicellular being anymore and starts behaving as if it's a single cell organism, that would count.
Yes.
And he's like, yeah, I mean, hypothetically that would count, but that would never happen.
Never happen.
And I said, well, it does, because that's what cancer is. And here's a paper that says that that's exactly what at least some types of cancer literally are. It's a mutation that interferes with the cooperation genes, and the cell starts dividing without regard to the body, and and it's just acting as if it was a single cell organism. And he went, but I have to think about that.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more from you, and good luck on your future debates and on your YouTube channel. Thank you for coming and joining me today on The Rational View. It's been great to chat with you.
Oh, it's been an honor. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/TheRationalView. Thanks for listening.